Welcome back to the LED Project Podcast. This is episode 128. I believe I've got my numbers all screwed up, but I'm super thrilled this morning or on a Sunday morning to have Asmahan Mashrah on the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm good. We just got done. I feel pretty good that we were just talking about pronouncing your name, and I feel pretty good that I got it right. I was really nervous because I was just like, oh my God, I don't want to butcher her name.
No, you're fine. I would have corrected anyway, so it's not a big deal.
Right. And the funny, we were just talking a little bit about names, and like this is nowhere near what we were talking about, but my name is Krueger, which should traditionally be pronounced Kruger, but for some reason my family pronounces it Krieger without the U, so I like every once in a while someone
Yeah.
people will do that,
So
and I just at some point I correct people, and sometimes I don't correct people, but
you let it go. Yeah.
it
I
was
think honestly, like I've done the same thing. Sometimes I'll correct. I think I correct when I'm like aware that this person just doesn't care. And I'm like, oh, you're going to care. And I'm going to
yeah,
correct you.
right.
But if it's like not intentional, like, it's just a slip up or whatever, I just let it slide. But
And that's the thing, with our podcast, we've been trying to really branch out, and because all we really want to do is amplify the conversation around what teachers really do, because it's so crazy. This just came across me this morning because I've been busy. That situation out in Idaho where a group of teachers decided to dress up as a border wall and stereotypical Mexicans, and I just am like, I think this podcast is so much more important because that gives all the millions of great teachers such a bad name.
it does. And it's not like this kind of stuff happens all over
Right.
but it's just insane when you see, especially when, I don't know, for me personally, when I'm so proud of what I do, and we always get the back end of everything.
Right.
So when you are so proud of your profession and you know that you are shaping minds so young and so easy to like persuade, right? You would think that you'd put a little bit more effort into how you are presenting yourself, not only in your classroom, but amongst your community. But for them to just, that was full out, like blown, like that was planned. Like they had to sit down, have discussions, text each other, order the costumes, make these brick walls, figure out who's going to do what. That was literally planned out. It wasn't like, I slipped up, everybody slips up. This was like planned down. And to know that as educators, you thought that was okay and you're in the classroom, I don't understand how you would think that was okay. I don't get where the people around them, did it stop them or did it say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't do this? Like, even though that's might be an internal belief of theirs because of the way they've lived out their life, when you're in the classroom, your doors are open to everyone and anyone that comes into your classroom, regardless of, their personal family beliefs, backgrounds, culture, religion, whatever. So you have to put yourself in a place where you're aware of who's, around you and what is okay to project and what is not okay to project. And you're opening up your doors to everyone. And so you should be welcoming of everyone. And what is that message? That message, not only did it send out to that community that, we don't want you here. We think it's a joke and you guys should be banned and whatever. But, think about all the white children in that class, right? So what are they're being exposed to that racist act. So now moving forward, they're thinking, well, my teachers did it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it must be okay. This was projected on Facebook. This was all over social media. It must be okay. It wasn't, I don't know. I can't wrap my mind around how you think that's okay,
and you know, with the political rhetoric, and we tend with the podcast not to go like super political, but you
Right.
know, when there's just complete misinformation about a caravan of
Oh my gosh.
people moving towards our border, and like some of
And
that,
all the troops being like sent, and I'm just like,
right? For
really?
you to, I mean, for a school to have to suspend or put on paid leave, like
Yeah, that's a whole
14,
nother thing.
14, 14 people are on paid leave for that. Like, I'm interested to see what happens, because I
I
don't think they'll lose their jobs.
Oh, they're not going to. And I don't know if you I just posted this on my stories like when it happened. I'm like, this is what's going to happen. They're going to issue a politically correct apology. I mean, that's you got your tail caught. But they're not going to I was shocked that they even suspended them. I truly thought they were just going to issue an apology and be like, "All right, sorry, we'll do better." And that was that. So, yeah, they did suspend, but it's paid. You should not be paid for making racist, explicitly racist remarks and gestures and exposing your children to that. That should not be paid leave. You should be suspended and moving forward to be terminated. That should not be in any classroom. I mean, that's just insane to me.
You know, and it's so strange. Me in, you know, now in my mid 30s, I'm just like starting, like, it never came into my, because I grew up like small, probably a town a lot like that town in Idaho, like small town
Mm-hmm.
Wisconsin, very small community. I think I maybe went to school with one or in my whole entire elementary, high school, middle school, one or two African American kids, and then
Oh.
maybe like a handful of Native American kids, and then
Mm-hmm.
maybe a kind of, I don't mean to say revolving in a bad way, but we had some migrant, Latino kids that would come back and forth, because their parents worked in our area,
Right.
and it never crossed my mind that like so many Halloween costumes are like overtly racist, and it
Right.
just
And I think, I mean, even listen, I've only been in this work for a little bit.
mhm,
I'm not an expert. And within my own community, there are biases and there are, racist barriers that we have to break as a whole. But I think when you're younger, you don't understand the impact, right? That's these
right,
things that are doing to you until you're much older, and you have your own like freedom to really explore your own thoughts, and no one is telling you like do this. As a child, you're getting do this, do that, do this, go there, learn this, read this, blah blah blah. So when you're older, you get to really self-reflect and think about all these things, and you don't notice it when you're a child, right? But when you do start to do the work and start to explore these narratives and the history of our nation as a whole, and whatever is happening in your community and how biased it is, and you start to think a little bit more on a deeper level and explore. And I think what happens with us as Americans is that we're stuck in a bubble. We're not, we don't explore. We're just like, this is what it is. This is our bubble. This is our hometown. And we kind of just stick it. We stay in that bubble. And we don't seek outside experiences. We kind of like things to be like the same all the time. And so when we do see a difference or we do see different, we automatically are fearful of that difference. And we don't try to really understand it. And like you said, you weren't aware of like the cowboys and the Indian kind of like dress up as Halloween when you were younger. You weren't aware of like
right,
what that was sending out. But as we get older and we start to really think about that, when you know better, you do better. You advocate,
right.
you speak up, you talk, you expose people to literature that might help guide them. So not knowing when you're younger is one thing, and then finding out and doing the work to like help yourself and those around you, that's another thing. That's where you start.
So you were educated in the United States, right? That's where
Yes,
you grew up,
yes. So I came to the United States when I was 5 years old.
right?
Um, my great grandfather served in World War II here, so our family has been here for generations. But I came when I was 5, so I kindergarten all the way through. I was educated in the States. Yep.
What was what was your educational experience like? I mean, because I'm interested in that perspective of being someone who came from somewhere else and then came into this system that was, has been projected as, the greatest education a person can get, but we're learning more and more that it's
It's really not, right?
way behind. So I'm
Way
interested
behind.
to hear what your
Uh,
educational experience was like.
so I think, honestly, when people ask me that, it could be just the same as yours. I started in kindergarten, so K through 12 was standard American education. Um, it's just unique because I was exposed to, like, our town is predominantly like, we're a mix. We're a good mix. So we have a lot of like Italian Americans, Arab Americans, um, African Americans. There's just a mixture. But within our area in our town, it's predominantly Middle Eastern students, right? So when going to school, we had white teachers, and that's all we had, and that's all we knew. So I don't know. I had some amazing educators, but I also had some very uh, racist educators. And you could tell as a child, like, oh, they don't like me. Oh, why? You don't understand as a kid, like, why
Right.
don't they like me? You know? And it wasn't until I got older, I realized, oh, that's why they don't like me. It's because of, my background or whatever. But education wise, like, I got the same education as anyone else that would go to our public schools. I'm fortunate enough to live in a town where we do have like resources and like books and technology and stuff like that available for our students. Whereas if you cross the street, like, they have nothing. So it's kind of interesting to see that now as an adult. But education wise, we had we had a good we had a good education. I mean, our teachers were great. Like I said, there are a handful that you just knew that they weren't down for you being there. And I remember explicitly being called an Arab by one of my teachers. So it's I don't know. I have mixed feelings about my education. I can think about like maybe three teachers who I loved, elementary, middle school, and high school, who um, who made me feel loved and important. And that's kind of why I went into teaching, because I did not see representation. I didn't see Muslim women as educators, and that's really what drove me. Like, hey, you can be that for your community. you know and now within our district, there's a lot more, so that's uh, great, but it took a while for our district to kind of get there.
Yeah, and my experience was I grew up small town Wisconsin, went to a small college in Minnesota, predominantly grew up with whites. Very, like I said, very minimal exposure to other cultures. And my first teaching job was in Houston in a school that was like 97% of the kids were on, free and reduced lunch, and like
Mm-hmm.
91% were Hispanic. And like, I can look back now and I was so far in over my head, like just in terms of, and why I want to talk with you of understanding their cultural like realities.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah, go ahead.
and it was just, it took me probably 3 years to really get even just a small understanding of their speech and their language and what their, I guess, to not project my reality onto them,
Mm-hmm.
because I had never been around kids who had 5 and 6 younger siblings that were in the
Mm-hmm.
8th grade that were basically raising their siblings.
Right.
And in those situations, I look back on it and I'm like, my university experience could have never prepared me for that, because they weren't
Oh, I
preparing me to probably go teach where I did. They were preparing me to stay close to where I was.
well, even within, like, so I went to U of M. Dearborn. We have a section of University of Michigan here in my town. But even as like a college student, they don't prepare you for the classroom. Let's
My
get real.
goodness.
You walk in and you're like, oh, what's going on? Where do I begin? So I think in general, our education system lacks, especially for teachers. They don't equip you enough, and you really do learn your first couple of years all the things that you should have learned in college, but they just don't teach. Um, you know, but growing up, so like I was the first to graduate from the girls in my family to graduate high school. So all the other girls in my family before me would probably do like ninth, 10th grade, and then they would just drop out. So we had to push, we had to fight, like our family, we had to fight for that because they were just so afraid of what would happen. Like, oh, you're going to go to school, and then they would just hear all these horror stories about what happens in school and at college life and blah blah blah. So my dad fought for us. He's like, my girls are going to school, you know. So I was the first to graduate high school, and then I kind of like slacked on college because I was working full time as well. And then my sister, who's younger than me, graduated with her bachelor's before me. So it took me a long time to get my bachelor's. And she's a school psychologist, and we work in the same building, which is really nice. But
Oh, that's awesome.
you are exposed to like most of the students I went to school with growing up were the same, like from the same background, from the same village in our country. It had 8 or 7 siblings, at least minimum. That was like the thing. And we all went to the same school, spoke the same language. So in terms of diversity, we're like, even within my classroom, 97% of my students are Arab American. Our school probably has one Black elementary student. It's because of where we are, the town we're in, and how the lines are drawn, which is insane because Detroit is like right next door, right? So
Right.
it's just really insane how that is and how that shapes you. But like you said, I wasn't really like although I was exposed to my own culture and students that have the same ethnicity and background as myself, I wasn't really exposed to other ethnicities and people of different backgrounds until I was in college. And that's when I started having like genuine, like deep conversations with these people, and started to like really shape my identity as an educator and what I wanted to be or project in the classroom.
Do you, we've talked to a ton of people. I mean, whether it's people in the LGBTQ community or the African American community or the Muslim community, everybody's talking about the importance of kids seeing teachers who look like them.
Oh yeah.
So I guess my question is, first, like, why that's important, but do you notice a difference between how your kids would respond to, say, someone who looked like me versus you who is, looks like they do? Because I think that was a thing that I really didn't understand is these kids, first and foremost, when I moved to Houston, they were super skeptical. I could have been the nicest guy, but they are going to be super skeptical of me because they know I probably don't understand what they're at. And it took me a long while to grow that. So I'm just interested in kind of what the response is from your kids to you versus what it would be to someone who looked like me.
That's really interesting that you ask that because I'm just going to be honest, right? So within our own community, there's a lot of microaggressions. And it's something that we really do have to work on, right? So within our community, although we're all from the Middle East and we speak Arabic, but I've had certain families say they did not want their child in my classroom because I happen to be from Yemen and not from the country that they were from, even though we're from the Middle East, even though we're Muslim, even though we speak the same language, right? So honestly, representation does matter. When you have so most of my children were like, oh, you're the first Yemeni teacher that we know that happened to be from Yemen. And those children will connect with me more. And it's because I just know their background. I know their culture. I know what their parents are probably saying to them at home because I've heard it and I probably say it to my own children. And we have a more like closer relationship. Not that I don't have a good relationship with other kids from other Middle Eastern countries, but they just latch on to that. Oh, that's home. That's safety. It's like a safety net, right? Like, you know, that person knows what you're going through
Right.
without even like speaking it, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like the other families, I think they realized, oh, she really is here for the good of the kids in the classroom. And now it's like, oh, we want our children in so and so's class, and they'll go request, you know, certain families will request, oh, you had my child, you know, you had my older sibling and I want you to have my younger sibling. And it just takes trust. And like you're saying, a lot of the time you were met with skeptic people saying, you know, how is this person going to react and stuff like that. And although representation is a must, we should have backgrounds, teachers of all backgrounds. Like, we have about 2 African American teachers in our building, in our entire building, and we're an elementary and middle school, and that's really sad to me that we don't have more. You know, even though we don't have African American kids, like I told you, we probably only have 1 in elementary. Our students should be exposed to that regardless, because that allows them to see those different types of people and say, oh, that's just a regular person or a regular human. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to worry about. And I think once people start making those connections and you start building relationships with families and students, those barriers kind of dismantle themselves, right? But like for me, just growing up, I wish I had a Middle Eastern, a Muslim teacher. I wish I saw someone like that, because that would have gave me not only the it would have affirmed that I matter, because, you know, obviously somebody who looks like me is doing the job that I wanted to do, or
Right.
is successful in some way. It would have showed me that I had a voice, because like I said, you know, that person's going to have your back to a certain extent, right? They're going to feel what you felt growing up. So you know they're going to always stand up for you. It just would have given me the impression like I can do it too, and there's nothing to be afraid of, right? So I think that's what I try to do for my students, especially the girls in my classroom. And I tell them, look, I went to school and I, you know, have a job and I do this and I do that, and you can do it too. And it's not a big deal, and you can, you know, balance it out and stuff like that. So representation on all scales matters. But even representation, like even if you don't have, like, even if I didn't have Black children in my classroom, or a Hispanic or LGBTQ children in my classroom, I would have loved to be that exposure for them to see me and say, oh, that's a Muslim teacher that we know, you know, and she's regular, just a regular human being, because that would really help dismantle hate, you know, because you're getting exposed to it in some way, which is what we need more of. And I think a lot of times, like when you mentioned the teachers in Idaho, like if they had a diverse colleagues and employees in their district, that I don't think that would have ever been acceptable, because it wouldn't have made sense. Like, diversification within your own district and within your own building is key to help dismantle all that kind of craziness, because then you'll just start to say, okay, these are just other people who just happen to be Muslim or happen to be Black, and there's nothing to be worried about or afraid of or anything like that. So that would have helped immensely with that situation. And I think it helps within our building, because they know that they can come to us for anything. Or if they have like, for example, like discipline in our district, within certain cultures, some people will discipline just like the old way with like the belt, you know? But then you have people who take it to the extreme. They're like, oh my God, they're like hurting these kids. And I'm like, whoa, slow down. You have to have a conversation with these children. You have to have a conversation and figure out like what's going on. Like, what do they mean by, oh, you know, I got spanked like last night or whatever it is, you know? You have to sit down and understand their background and their culture and where they're coming from before you make these outrageous assumptions that God knows what's happening in their homes or, you know, with their families. And I feel like we still have a lot to work on as a whole in education about really understanding or taking the time to understand students of different backgrounds and their cultures and their families and it starts with conversation and dialogue, you know?
Right, right. You know, and I think with those people in Idaho too, the chances of them actually knowing any real people from Mexico is got to be so slim. Because if you knew and you had you were friends with people from that area, like you wouldn't make those same types of jokes. Like you, and that was the thing for me.
Right.
Like I moved to Houston, and you know it was the first time I was ever really exposed. I mean, because Houston's like one of the most diverse cities in the country.
Diverse, yeah.
So, you know, I have Hispanic students, but I didn't, like me being from Wisconsin, I didn't realize that like you kind of said, like, don't call someone from El Salvador Mexican, and don't call someone from
Right.
Honduras El Salvadorian, and all those, and just those little nuances of that culture, and along
Right.
really with the
And
African
so
American culture.
different.
Yeah.
Right. And it's funny you say that because sometimes they'll be like, Miss Mashrah, can you translate for this parent? And I'm like, where is this parent from? Just because they speak Arabic doesn't mean I speak the same dialect as them. Like we have totally different dialects. And they're like, oh
Right.
yeah. Like,
Right.
so you don't realize how different those countries are, you know?
I guess a question I have for you too on that front. So say I were to go into your school with predominantly Middle Eastern Muslim kids, what would be the importance of me letting them really get to know who I am? Because I feel like we can get to know our kids, but I've in my experience, if kids don't get to know you, what you trying to get to know them is not going to matter much.
Right. So I think as educators, regardless of who's in front of us, we need to be vulnerable. And I think that we're innately like worried about, oh my gosh, am I getting this lesson right? Am I planning enough? Am I doing this? Am I doing that? And it has to be like Pinterest perfect all the time or Instagram worthy and blah, 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 blah. And we plan to death and we forget to just be vulnerable with our kids and just have like downtime and have them ask questions that have nothing to do with the lesson and be okay and joke with them
Right.
and let your guard down. And I think before a child will even open up themselves to you, they want to see you doing that, you know, and you letting your guard down and you saying, oh, this is what, you know, or one day I did this and what did you guys do? And well, and bridging that gap, like I'm not only your teacher, but I'm like another person that you can come and have a conversation with. And I think we're so like rigid as educators. We're just like, we want everything to be done. And we have all these, and it's not even our fault really, because you have all these like things on top of you that you have to do and time requirements. And you're always worried about not enough time, right? And state testing and all that stuff. So we're already stressed out as it is. But I take a moment like to just, I have breathing, like I'll be like, okay, put everything down, put your hands up. We're just going to take a deep breath. We're just going to calm down because this is where I'm really like having trouble with. And they'll be like, it's okay, Ms. Mashrah, this is what we need to do. Like they'll calm me down. So they know, I think when I let myself and let my guard down and allowed them to ask questions that are personal and questions that really dig deep. And I never shamed them for that. I just let them ask those questions and I let those conversations happen. And then they'll start to be like, oh, Miss Mashrah, did you know that this is what I'm doing after school today? Or, oh, Miss Mashrah, I play football. Come watch me at a game. Or,
Right.
oh, do you guys eat this type of food? Or they'll always ask me, which is hilarious because like most of my students are from like Syria, Iraq, and like Lebanon, right? So they'll be like, what's a seed? We always hear these Yemeni kids saying they're having a seed for food. And I'm like, oh my God, it's the best thing ever. And I'll like explain it to them. So
Right.
just taking the moment to like have those conversations with them and not worry about, getting your reading lesson done. It'll get done. Like just take a moment and relax and have that conversation with them. And if something genuinely comes up, whether it's like race or religion or whatever, I have those conversations with my students. And I'm not going to lie to you. Like I've gotten like, oh, don't have those conversations. Like you're in education. I'm like, no, I'm having these conversations with my kids. Like they're exposed to this. They watch the news. They know what's going on in the world. Like if they come in and ask me a question, I'm going to have that conversation with them. I'm not going to shy away from it. And I think we just have to like let down our guard and let them see us as human beings before they will allow you to make those connections with them, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm right.
It totally makes sense. And I'm just thinking about too, like just in the news, they were saying that, voters 18 to 26 or 28 or whatever it was, never hardly vote in midterms. And now like
It's
those
like
numbers are
like,
through the roof. And I'm just thinking about, I only knew, like growing up, I only knew what I scammed from my dad from his newspaper.
mm-hmm.
Like, and very little of what I saw, like, because I wasn't like a committed news watcher. You just didn't. But like you said, these kids are in it. They see it. And
they watch like our last presidential election. Like my kids came in scared. I had students who were crying, and they were terrified. Like what's going to happen, because of all the crazy rhetoric that was being said, and I'm just like, what, you can't teach math at that point. You just can't. When when they're literally anxious and they're like, what's going to happen to us? Are we going to lose our citizenship? Are we going to get kicked out of our home? Like you cannot, there's no way. I don't know what educator would be like, oh, let's get out your math books. Like you must be delusional at that point if you're not going to sit and have that conversation with your kids and calm them down and kind of like give them a moment to, feel validated. Like, yeah, these are real fears that are happening. And you're not the only one that's afraid. Like everyone is afraid, about all these kind of things that happen, it's just, it's really interesting to see that they're so involved. Like you said, I grew up the same way. I knew what was happening based on what my dad told me, like about what's happening. Okay, this is what's happening. And we were lucky enough, though, growing up, we always had a satellite dish. So we were exposed to different news channels from all over the world as well.
Right.
And it wasn't just CNN and Fox and whatever. So we were able to get like to flip to a Saudi channel and get the Saudi news, or to England news or whatever it is. Like we were able to flip and see the different perspectives and stuff like that. So we were able to grow up with that around. But again, like I always said to my dad, like, okay, so who are you voting for? Why are you voting? Like I never really invested until a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, shit's gonna really hit the fan. Like I really should know what's going on, And it's fine. Like a lot of people are still in that, like Lanisha was saying, some guy was like, this is the first time that I've ever voted, and he was like 50 years old. Lanisha Tab from Education with an Apron, or Apron Education on IG, and she was like, oh, I vote all the time, and he's like, oh, I just didn't realize how important it was. And we've now come to see how excruciatingly important it is. But these kids, these young kids, the generation we're teaching now, they're exposed to it. They'll come in and tell me what's happening every single day. Just the other day, they were like, did you hear about those two people that got shot in the grocery store market because they're black? I'm like, oh, yeah. How do you feel about that? Like, what are your thoughts? And, we have that discussion. Um, and I think a lot of teachers are so afraid to have those discussions because they're afraid of like, the reprimand, like, oh, they're going to go home and tell their parents, and their parents are going to come in and complain and blah, 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 blah. And I'm just over it. I have those discussions in my classroom, and I'm not there to teach. I've made it a point to my like family, my school family, like I'm not there to teach math, reading, and science and social studies. I'm there to teach the whole child, and I'm there to teach real world. And when they leave this classroom, I know that the children that I personally have had will be able to function outside of my classroom doors. And that's all that I'm worried about. Like, of course, I'm going to teach these things, but I am going to, if these things happen naturally, I am going to go ahead and have these conversations with them.
Right.
So,
And I'm trying to empathize with, kids that you have, or, even like your own kids. And me being social studies, history, political science, that's my educational background. I understand that the president can't take away birthright citizenship. Like, I understand that it would have to be a constitutional amendment, and there's no way that would ever fly. There's no way that would ever go through.
it's funny you say there's no way that would ever happen. My perspective is it could.
Oh man, you're right.
Okay, so
it could.
And the reason why I'm saying this is because we all said there's no way Trump's going to become president. Like, there's no fuck way that's going to happen. Excuse my language, right?
Right.
But guess what? He's president. Okay. So that should be a lesson to us that we really need to explore, read, figure out information, and make ourselves aware so that if these things start to, like, if these steps start to happen, we can then just be like, okay, we're ready to go. We're ready to fight. And a lot of times people will be like, there's no way. Like, we thought there has to be, like you said, a constitutional amendment, and there has to be like all these hearings and all these things that have to happen. And nothing surprises me anymore. And that's what I'm raising my children with. I'm afraid for my kids. Like, I literally am afraid for them because I know I can't send them outside to play outside because I'm terrified of what's going to happen if they're unsupervised. So I was raised like, you go outside, you play. When the lights come on, you go home.
Yeah.
That's just the way it was. Like, we didn't have to worry about all these things. And now it's like, yeah, you might think it might not happen, but I have a totally different perspective where it's going to happen, like the whole ban, right? The whole like Muslim ban. Oh, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Well, if it happened, so now what? Like, we were a little too late on that. You know what I mean?
Right.
So things like this can happen. We just need to make sure that we're educating ourselves. So if we do start to see those red flags, we don't dismiss them and say that it's not going to happen. We live in a democracy. We're, the United States of America, blah, 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 blah. Well, yeah, we do live in a democracy. We are the US of A, but granted, a lot of crazy things have happened in this nation. A lot of horrible things have happened in this nation. This is a nation built on a lot of racism. So anything could happen. We need to stop thinking things can't happen and start realizing that this is our history and it's just repeating itself in a different way. So you just have to just be aware of what's going on around you, I think. Yeah. And I am, like I said, I'm terrified. Like, I have, like, if something happens and, they say, you got to go. I kind of like, I've had this conversation with my husband, like, okay, where would we go? What would we do? Where would we live? What will happen to our kids? Like, I've had to have those conversations, and it's just because it is what it is for me and my family and many like me. But that's what people need to be aware of. Just, you might not think it might happen because of your background and the way you were raised and the privilege of your skin color, but I have that fear that it could happen very well and easily, So
Yeah, and that's the thing. When the Access Hollywood tape came out, I was like,
mhm.
there's no way the American people will stand for someone like this to be the president. And I was wrong because, I was in Houston at the time, and
And a
I
lot of
had
people underestimate how smart, like, he is a bigot and he's a racist and he says some very crazy things. And it's because he knows what's driving people to the polls. And he knows that he's not an idiot. He understands the history of this nation and how it was built. So he's using that rhetoric to drive those polls and get the numbers that he needs, right? But when you've never been exposed to, I mean, he's just blatant about it. And I think that's what
yeah.
shocked everyone. Like, he's just
Hmm.
like, it is what it
Explicit.
is,
Yeah.
explicitly says it. And everybody's like, oh, it's never going to happen. But you have a lot of people harboring those same thoughts and suppressing those same ideologies. And now you have a president who's outright saying it. So now they're like, yeah, we do feel this way and we are going to do this and we're going to, you know, make America great again. Like, when was it great? Like, let's just
Yeah.
start there. There's a lot we
Yeah.
could go on, right? So we just need to be aware, like, anything is possible. Who
Yeah.
would have thought a celebrity would be president,
Yeah. It's so funny.
Yeah.
I think back to I never really watched that. You remember that HBO show, The Newsroom,
Yeah.
with Jeff Daniels, and there's that famous scene where he's on stage and the guy asks him, why is America the greatest country in the world? And he like comes right out and lists all the reasons why we're not. And you're like, that's TV. And then it's so funny
Right.
that TV all of a sudden like mirrors
Real life.
these things, and that's even just talking to you and talking to Liz Kleinrock, who had her consent thing like blow up, and like
Oh, yeah.
it's opened my eyes at 34 years old to the fact that like I sometimes like now question myself, like, am I deserving of the opportunities that I got? Like I've been dismissed from
But
jobs,
I mean,
but
so I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to challenge you and say, like, okay, we can't choose what families or what um, class we're, like, social class, or like we're born in, right? It is what it is. But even though you do have these privileges, okay, nobody's like, okay, whenever I get feedback like, oh, you're just mad because blah, blah, I'm like, I'm not mad about anything. Like, those are your privileges and whatever, you have them. You're cognizant that these are the privileges I have. And you shouldn't say, am I deserving? You should say, what could I do, knowing that I have these privileges,
right.
to help those that don't have the same privilege as me, or whose voices, knowing that, you know what, if me and you were standing in the same room talking to someone, I bet you they'd listen to you more because you're a white man, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So how could I amplify those voices? How could I take it, like, the light or the spotlight away from me and say, hey, like, this person, like, I might know a little bit, but this person knows a little bit more than me, and they're more valuable in this certain discussion, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, for example, Black Lives Matter movement, right? Totally in support of it. But I'm not the person to go to for that. I'm going to show you, like, who you should be listening to in regards to that. You know what I mean? So even as a Arab American Muslim woman, I have privileges that my Black Muslims might not have. My Black Muslim sisters and brothers do not have. You get what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
So how could I use my privilege to not say I'm not, do I deserve this? It is what it is. You have them. So how can we use them to shed light on those people who can't? Whether it's a Muslim, whether it's a person of LGBTQ background, whether it's a person of Jewish faith, or whatever. That person in that person in their predicament, how could I shed light on their, using my voice to help guide their voice, to help have people hear them, and not just dismiss them. So you're in a position, I think, that's very valuable, because you're doing just that. Like inviting me is amplifying my voice and my experiences. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I thank you for that, because you used your privilege to be like, hey, I want to have this person on my show and hear their story and hear what they're about and what they've experienced, which is awesome. And I wish we had more people who were like that in our
Yeah.
community. And unfortunately, we don't.
Yeah. And to your point, that I've really, especially in the last year that we've been having like guests on our podcast, I've learned, and I asked Liz Kleinrock this question once. I was like, when am I educated enough to speak on something? And she said, there's not a right or wrong answer. She said,
Right.
basically, you should always be educating yourself on these things. But I'm a person right now that's, when I get asked questions, I say, I don't know a lot. And like you said, I'm trying to point people in the right direction, because
Right.
my experience
like
is
I
so
said,
small.
but you're not the only one in that position. And I think a lot of people think like a lot of people will come ask me like questions about Islam and stuff like that. Well, I have a unique experience with my religion. You know, there's 6 billion Muslims out there, and Arab Muslims are the smallest percentage.
Right.
So I can't speak on my Chinese Muslim brother or sister. I have no idea how they grew up, or how they were exposed to Islam, or what they're how deeply they're practicing or whatever. So I can only speak on my experience. And I can only educate you on what I know. But then I always say, well, I don't know that much. Like it's same as you, like, oh, I don't know that much, but here's what I do know. And here's where you can go to find out more. And I think that's more valuable than just not saying anything at all.
Yeah. And
So we're all learning.
and I think that's really what we've learned is kind of our space for this podcast is, there's so many great teachers, and there's so many diverse teachers, and there's so many like incredible teachers out there but our collective teacher voice is constantly negative. It's constantly, and we're sort of coming to the understanding that that's not any teacher that I know's voice. I mean, there are some teachers who are very negative, but the majority of the teachers we've talked to are incredible and love the profession and are doing amazing things for kids. But like you said, our space right now is to just start to little by little tell as many teacher stories as we can, so that people start to understand like this is what we're doing. Because, like you said, in terms of teachers, like my experience from Wisconsin to Texas back to Wisconsin is way different than your experience in Michigan. And
and I can tell you that within I've worked in 3 schools within our district, right? And each school they have their own like unique climate and culture, right? Even though we might all be like Middle Eastern or whatever, like I mentioned before. But just going from just these schools, you can just learn so much. And I can't imagine working in a school. So Katie works, I don't know if you know Katie Rogers, the city teacher. She works in Detroit public schools, and they have no water. And I'm just like,
yeah, that's bonkers to me.
that's insane to me. And I literally work at a school where if you cross the major street next to us, you are in Detroit. So I can't imagine working in her school or being exposed to what she's exposed to. It's totally different
Right.
experiences, but it still shapes you as an educator, and you can bring these stories back and say, well, this is what happened with me, and this is how I dealt with it, and
Yeah.
and I think that's what you guys are doing, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And like you said, your experiences vary just going from Houston to Wisconsin, but I bet you after leaving Houston you had a very different perspective,
right,
coming back to Wisconsin.
yeah,
Right.
and it's crazy. And where I live is only about 45 minutes from Minneapolis, St. Paul. And it's very affluent, like very, very affluent. Like the town next to mine just did renovations on their high school that make it look like a 5-star resort.
Wow.
And inside it is brand new top to bottom. And then you have, like you said, Katie's situation, where there legitimately is no water. And
Yeah.
we talked with Sarah Forrest, who is, the designer teacher. She was teaching in
Yeah.
schools where there was still the Soviet Union listed as a country. That's how old
Yeah.
their textbooks were. And it's just,
Oh, yeah.
and it's so crazy that
It is crazy. Like, I don't know. It's nuts. I mean, the district that I'm in, like I said, we're very fortunate to have like smart boards and
yeah,
resources and stuff like that. And then um, Katie was like, I can't even make copies. And I'm like, oh, can you just call me and I'll make your copies?
yeah.
I'll help you out. Like, what do you need? Like, so it's just crazy to see how different, like you said, like a resort school. Like, I can't even imagine that.
I
Like,
mean,
that's nuts.
yeah, it's it's bonkers. And I just, I went to Houston. I taught 7 years, took a year off because my partner and I, Wilkie, we have we do the podcast and all our stuff through our nonprofit. And so
Yeah.
I took a year to really work and build that. And then I came back and taught for a year. And then I got non-renewed last year in a school district that's booming. So,
Uh-huh.
now I'm doing just a landscaping job to make, pay my bills and keep doing this. And my girlfriend
Yeah.
asked me, just the other night, she's like, do you have a plan? Would you go back to teaching? And I was like, if I'm going back to teaching, I'm going to go into Minneapolis. Like, I would rather go back into Minneapolis or go into St. Paul and teach there, where I would feel more comfortable than I did at a predominantly white school where
Mm.
I, I mesh
That's
with the
really
kids.
true, but I don't know. Like, sometimes I feel like those kids are the kids that need you most.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing too. I, the majority of the kids that I taught when I was at this other school, come from good families. And yeah, there's kids everywhere that are going through rough times, but
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like where I'm at, like I'm with you, like teaching content is so secondary
Mm-hmm. I
that,
mean, I get in trouble for it. Like,
oh, so did I all the time.
you on this lesson? I'm like, yes, I am, but I'm also doing this in my classroom.
Right. Right.
Um, it is
And
what it is, whatever.
yeah. And my guy, Will, for the first time, he's been teaching in Houston 13 years. And this is the first time he's ever worked in a predominantly African-American student. And he's African and an African-American man. And the kids are
Mm.
still like super skeptical of him,
Yeah,
and
because even though, like I said, even though he's, even with me, like even though I'm Middle Eastern, doesn't mean that I have the same experience as them or understand what their struggle was.
right.
And so they're probably skeptical of him in that sense. Like, okay, so who is this guy? Like, what did he really
Yeah.
go through? Is he really going to
Yeah.
understand
Right.
what we went through? Because not everybody is the same. And I feel like um, as an educator, especially because I really do try to be culturally responsive in my classroom, but that doesn't just mean like I'm exposing my students to so like I don't just expose my kids to like Middle Eastern things, right? So
Right.
I make sure that the books, especially in my classroom, are there from all different kinds of backgrounds, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're the same color, a different color, the same religion, a different religion, poor, um, or anything. Like, we had a discussion the other day when we were talking about like what, I was reading a book, and then there was a homeless man in this book, and they're like, I was like, well, why do you think they're treating him this way? And they're like, oh, it's because he's homeless, and if you're homeless, that means you're bad. And I'm like, whoa, like, let's rewind. Like, how did you get
Right.
that impression?
Right.
And we had to sit down and talk about like, what does it mean to be homeless, and how do you think they got to that position, and why does it make them seem good or bad? Like, how did you get that relation, perspective? And so you're teaching the whole child, and it doesn't even matter. Like, I hear like some of my white colleagues will be like, well, that lived somewhere else, predominantly white, and they teach white kids. They're like, well, how can we be culturally responsive? We have all white kids in our classroom. I'm like, so what? Not every white kid has the same background as the other person. Maybe this
Right.
person is going home who has nothing to eat. Maybe this person is going home who's never been exposed to this. I mean, within their own classroom, you need to be culturally responsive to their culture and experiences, and how, you know, their experience is shaping them. So it doesn't mean when you're culturally responsive, you're only doing this with kids who are like different religions or colors. You're doing this in every classroom based on the culture of that classroom. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're taking the needs of the whole child, and not just, oh, well, I don't have any Black kids in this class, so I'm not going to teach them about, you know, all the great African American people who devoted their lives to certain things and built this country, you know?
Right.
That doesn't work. Like, you have to really break apart your classroom dynamic and then build on that.
Perfect. Oh, I could spend the rest of my Sunday talking to you, but we've been going almost an hour now. So I want to make sure that you're ready, because your kids got to be getting home sometime.
Yeah, they are actually.
Awesome. Well, for the people that want to follow you, want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm most active. I mean, I do have a Facebook, but I just link everything on Instagram to my Facebook.
So totally.
So whatever they're seeing is really on my Instagram. So I'm most active on my Instagram social media. So they can follow me at Teaching with Sugar and Spice, or if they just type in Asmahan Mashrah, it'll pop up. They can also email me at teachingwithsugarandspice@gmail if they have any questions, or if they, you know, just want to have a genuine conversation. I'm always willing to do that. Awesome. And it could be about anything. So I tend to be very open. So if I don't know something, I can tell you, I don't know, I'll let you know, I'll get back to you. But
right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. And gosh, I'm going to have you back on again sometime so I can keep learning. But thank you so much for being on our podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you and just learning about your experience, and, you know, how your experience also shaped who you are now. And you're doing such a phenomenal job with allowing teacher voices to be heard on this podcast. So we really appreciate that.